From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Dee. As we speak, 9 o'clock in Brisbane, Canberra, Sydney, Melbourne. Just gone 7 a.m. in New York City, and our attention is in Los Angeles right now, where the breaking news is that police are trying to bring one of the many anti-war protests and at times pro-Hamas rallies to an end. Now, let me give you a timeline here. About 2.75 hours ago, so let's say 3 hours ago, police first turned up and they tried to break this protest up. Now, as you can see, and as you have been seeing through the night, one of the main things they want to do is to pull down a bunch of wooden barriers which have been built up to stop the police being able to get to the people that are in the protest in order to pull them out. Now, at that point in time, police actually had to pull back because of the resistance that they were getting from the protesters. And about 40 minutes ago, police came back with greater force. But as you can see, what they are being met with right now, the flashing lights are flashing lights which, just similar to the Black Lives Matter protests of a couple of years ago, are intended to blind the police. Now, the police, again, have given multiple warnings and are now trying to move people effectively who are trespassing in a place of which they don't own. The university owns it, and because it has significant public funds in it, that's why we are where we are right now. But unlike, say, probably what's happening around Australia, what's happening here in Los Angeles is that the people being removed are not just digging in, but they are seemingly prepared for the upscale in how the police are going to move them on. Now, they, in fact, many, and the pictures that you are seeing right now are what we're receiving from the local television station in Los Angeles, also coming through our association with Fox News. Of what you're going to see is all of those little wooden panellings that are basically the borders that were put up around the protest to try and pull, to break down the wall and create that barrier between police. But you'll see some footage, and because we're taking it live, we're bouncing between all of the different sources. So if our control room sees anything, please follow along here if we can. If not, we obviously stick with what we have here. But the protesters, as you can see, they've got gas masks on. Some of them also will have hard hats on. Now, in that case, it's going to be a bloke who's wearing a bike helmet, but there are people who've got sort of construction hats on. And as Danica was wrapping up in the past hour, as police were firing tear gas into that group, obviously the effects of the tear gas is very different when people have got their goggles on and they've got their masks on. But what was happening was that somehow the protesters were working out a way to either, collect the canisters that had been fired at them, but they also were starting to fire tear gas back towards the police. So police will win this because they always do. Whether we like it or not, the power of the state is always going to overpower whatever group they are trying to move on. But the ugliness of it is obvious, and the lessons perhaps learnt out of what happened a little bit earlier in New York is what we're starting to see here. But UCLA, famous college, famous university in the United States, where the protests, again, the anti-war protests, and at times pro-Hamas protests, have been building for some time, building for a few days, and of course are now being broken up as we speak. Now, we'll come back to the full screen throughout the night, but I do want to focus on everything that's been happening here in Australia. So we will, from time to time, go from what we call the full screen, which is the whole screen, obviously, or at time to time we will put it, there we go, down there from time to time when you start to see things. My team are watching the pictures as well, so if anything escalates, we will speak to it, and no doubt again at the many times throughout the hour we will return to it, but we're not going to go into the full rolling coverage because while at the moment the arm wrestle is going on and seems to be pretty evenly handed, the police will win it, and they will win it in perhaps the next hour. As they start to do it, we will show it to you. But again, let's get back to our country and the things that happen right here. Now, the Queensland government is, of course, sinking. Every single opinion poll will tell it to you, and it doesn't matter how much Stephen Miles giggles when asked questions about youth crime, despite the fact that, of course, they go on to say, oh, I'm not laughing about the question you asked me about youth crime, but he was laughing about the question about youth crime. Ever since he took over from Palaszczuk, and the government was going to lose when Palaszczuk was their leader, well, the political fortunes have gone absolutely through the toot. for the Labor Party, and the latest polling that came out last week in the Courier Mail suggested that they could lose as many as 21 seats at the next election. Obviously, it doesn't just wipe them out from government, but it sort of sends them, well, kind of back to the pre-Palaszczuk era of being able to hold shadow cabinet meetings inside a Tarago. Now, while I hope that that's the result, the reality is it might get a little closer than that, but at this stage, people are putting their money on a change of government, something even Giggles can see.
Well, this confirms what we've known for some time, that the most likely outcome in October is that David Crisafulli will be the new Premier.
Of course, the issues of youth crime remain front and centre for people in Queensland, up and down the map. Certainly in regional Queensland, it is the A1 issue by, well, dare I say, a country mile. But then cost of living remains the biggest issue for people across the entire state. In fact, that's not me guessing, that's me looking at the same polls that are producing what the election result will be. Now, as you can see, there is some differences here between, say, regional areas where they believe that crime is the #1 issue, whereas in southeast Queensland, cost of living remains the #1 issue. You put the two together, you start to see the picture. The cost of living is the #1 issue in Queensland with 22%. Crime is at 21%, and then it's daylight before we start to get to health, which, as we know, is all about ambulance ramping and the failures of this government, housing, which is about population, which is all the failures of this government and the federal government, and so on, before we get to the very specific issues that people may have. You would think in a state election things like education matter, but when things have been stuffed up as badly by this government, there are lots of other issues that will see them, fingers crossed, get turfed later in the year. So today, a desperate government, a desperate Premier, and a vaunted political machine, that is the Labor Party advertising machine in Brisbane, has decided that they have an ultimate solution when it comes to cost of living. They are going to give Queenslanders the opportunity to potentially get $1,000 off their power bills. Now, Queensland is in fact expected to have higher power bills than the rest of the country for a whole collection of reasons I won't bore you with, but that's the reality. So Stephen Miles thinks that he will be able to single-handedly flip the election with $1,000 off power bills.
This is the biggest contribution a state has ever made to support households with their energy bills.
Of course, it's a bribe. It's a straight-out bribe. Because it's a rebate, the arguments are that it's not like a $1,000 cheque and ends up being something that ends up being inflationary. But that's how desperate that state government is. Now, my suggestion is that the people of Queensland will take the money, run, and still get rid of the government. But if they're this desperate, this far out, imagine what they're going to pull between now and the seemingly inevitable date of them losing the election in a few months' time. It's an insight into politicians who ignore problems for years and years and years, who make problems worse every day they're in power, who pretend, and remember, Labor MPs referred to youth crime concerns as an LNP beat-up. They think it's a media fiction. But the reality is that this is a desperate government that'll do everything it can to try to save its own backside, but I do trust the people of Queensland are getting ready to truly get rid of this mob.
Will the Premier admit power rebates need to be given to hard-working Queenslanders because under Labor, Queensland has the highest power costs in the nation?
The Premier and Labor will do and say anything to hang on to power.
It's a bribe. You know it's a bribe. People won't take it. And the idea that you have to really apply for it as opposed to it all being automatically put in place. But one of the reasons why they're able to do it in part is because many of the energy companies, in fact, the only energy company in regional Queensland is owned by the Queensland government. So does this mean you just won't get a power bill between now and the election? Who knows? But I think Queenslanders are smart enough to see when they're being bribed, and they're being bribed by people who don't deserve to be in power anymore. I've just got an update for you about what's happening in LA. As I said, the arm wrestle that's happening between police and protesters, the pictures that are coming to us via the news agencies and now via the local TV stations in LA start to show that the barricades have now been broken, the tents are now starting to be pulled apart, and the police are winning the arm wrestle at the moment, as predicted and as obvious with the anti-war and at times pro-Hamas protesters. When we have some live reporting from there, we'll turn around and maybe show a grab to you a little later in the show. There was a huge reaction to our conversation last night about accountability, about why this becomes a real reason why people don't trust our political system anymore, because there's no accountability when people do things that are very obviously wrong, like Victoria's hotel quarantine system. As we told you last night, no one will be held accountable because all charges against the Health Department in Victoria are going to be dropped, despite the fact that the decisions made in and around hotel quarantine by the Victorian government led to almost 700 people dying. A direct line between hotel quarantine, the decision to use security guards, not police, and a whole series of other failings, but no one's been held responsible. As I told you last night, everyone bar the health minister who kind of blew the whistle a little bit on Daniel Andrews has either got a pension for life, like he does, or they're sitting pretty in taxpayer-funded jobs running everything from the arts precinct to your local health service or even the Australian Grand Prix, all because they did their bit. They all collectively said they knew nothing at the inquiry, yet they all go on to much greener pastures. You pay for it either way. Well, another example about this lack of accountability, of course, connects back to the Prime Minister and his reaction in the past couple of days via his ministers to a system that they created, a board that they appointed under the promise that they would be the people who would be able to keep Australia safe in regards to the people who should still be in detention because they are not refugees, yet they refuse to leave the country. As you know, the High Court made its decision, the federal government overreacted and said every single person needs to come out, as opposed to going the long way, dragging out the process, just like the activists have in the past, and making every single detainee go through that process. I don't need to bore you with the gory details, but you know again that one of the people who should have remained in immigration detention, who should have had an ankle bracelet, who should have had their bail denied, is accused by Western Australian Police of a significant role in a horrible assault that, of course, we've all seen play out on our TV screens for the past few days. But what about that lack of accountability that we saw with hotel quarantine? Well, surprise, surprise, the Prime Minister says there is no accountability for his ministers nor him as the Prime Minister for a system that he set up that has failed the people of Australia in terms of their safety and specifically a family in Perth.
The Community Protection Board is, of course, a board that's independent of politicians. It's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases.
Now, this steams me. He appointed them, which means he can sack them. The message that should have automatically come back of this failure, and you've seen the results on television here, you do not need the criminal process to play out. You can see very obviously what the consequences are. And that's a scenario where the process failed. The process failed. So everyone involved in the process should go, lose their job, no second chances. If you've got to pay out their contracts in full, I don't care. Get rid of them. Replace them with a new group of people who are smart enough to not let people make the same disastrous decisions, not mistakes, decisions that led to the scenario that it did. But it's just the latest example of Albo accepting zero responsibility, and thus we get zero accountability. You saw what happened at the domestic violence rally last weekend. The Prime Minister forces himself to the microphone. He ends up putting the organiser in tears, who is supported by the people around them, yet, of course, it wasn't his fault.
It was an emotional day.
When it comes to power prices, he made a promise at the last election.
$275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275.
Yet the promise, which was BS then, but is absolutely never going to be a reality now, he doesn't accept responsibility for the lie that he told either knowingly or his inability to deliver the promise.
Also, what's occurred with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has seen a global issue, a spike in global prices for energy that's fueling international inflation. That is something that is having an impact here as well.
Remember, he chose to spend $450 million on a referendum with questions that he wouldn't split in a campaign that he decided should take most of last year, and he made the decision not to make the most of polls that was 60-40 yes. Instead, we saw a scenario where it was 60-40 no. And again, no responsibility, no accountability.
Misinformation, the misinformation which is there.
Instead, that's what he blames, and now he seeks to censor the internet with people who will use data and opinion to point out the failures of his government. Yet those posts, should they make it to social media, will be ruled to be misinformation by left-wing think tanks, and then again a totally impartial process full of people that they appoint, by the way, using the law that they write, by the way, will make the decision about whether or not social media companies will get fined to an extent where eventually they'll turn around and no longer accept the postings of news organisations or news presenters or opinion hosts that the government doesn't like. All for our safety, of course. Meantime, as we count down towards the budget, in fact, no one counts down towards the budget, just the political class count down towards the budget, but we all know that whatever spin happens on the Tuesday night, we're able to bang some holes in it like Swiss cheese by 9 p.m. And by the way, a little shout out, we're going to be on Budget Night, special edition, 90 minutes, starting at 9:30 on Budget Night, so you'll hear everyone else and then you'll hear us rip and roar. And then over a week to 2 weeks, they'll be dragged kicking and streaming to eventually see what we can see at 9:30, which is the problem, not the spin. That's just the nature of a budget lockup. Well, again, we have as part of this the lie constantly being told by the Treasurer that the main focus is all about the cost of living and battling the cost of living and all that other garbage they've said how many times. In fact, this is the latest spin that's coming out via Labor MPs.
We have to support people who are doing it really tough with the higher cost of living, but also not fan the flames of inflation, which would put interest rates up. I think the Treasurer has done a fantastic job of delivering targeted relief to families in ways that don't put upward pressure on inflation.
Oh, and aren't they doing so much, aren't they? They took $1,500 off you last year, 10 million workers, $1,500 worse off, not to mention how much you've had to pay in extra interest rates, the best of which will be a perhaps quarter of a reduction by 2026. And then, of course, there's the too little too late tax cuts. Oh, geez, what a thank you. Thank you, government. Thank you for giving me back $15.46. Oh, thank you. Where would we be without you? In exactly the same place we are right now, which is hurting. Another example of the people who supposedly they're focused on, but they ain't helping at all. The unemployment rate is 3.9%, but the underemployment rate, i.e. people who technically have a job but are not doing the hours they need to be able to pay their bills, and let alone the people who, again, as I say, are legitimately looking for work. Well, believe it or not, I agree with the sentiment, and I think most people will, and just like a broken clock, it can be right twice a day, but Greg Jericho, writing in The Guardian, says that the budget reveals what governments actually care about. And who could argue that the decision of the Labor Party to keep the job seeker payment where it is keeping people who are looking for work in a level of poverty? Don't believe me? Have a look at these stats, which again were produced through the Australian Bureau of Statistics and have been interpreted by Greg. And it's just $386 per week if you are trying to look for a job. Good luck paying for a house, family and all the rest of it. Now, while I'm not suggesting that these people should be getting anywhere near $1,000, $2,000 a week, have a look at this. When you actually compare the unemployed benefits to the age pension, while the age pension has quite rightly and correctly been significantly increased over the years, the unemployment benefits basically stay in the same place. The assumption being there's no votes in people who are looking for work, but when cost of living is as bad as it currently is, to see that huge financial disparity in two groups of Australians who do struggle to make ends meet, who could possibly argue $386 a week is appropriate? Now, whether you lift that range for the first 6 months of unemployment and then it starts to fall down the longer you remain unemployed, maybe we can have that conversation. I'm doing the most dangerous thing, which is just wondering out loud. But this one might drive it home for you. The blue line is the poverty level in Australia. The unemployment benefits are way below it. And the interpretation that Greg Jericho has put via these graphs in The Guardian today is that even if you increased to 90% of the current age pension, you would still be way below the poverty line. So forgive me if I don't believe the government when they say that they are there for those that are doing it toughest. Because even the age pension isn't good enough. The carers pension isn't good enough, let alone the people that are trying to look for work because they lost work for no fault of their own, or as we've talked about a million times on this program, the true ism that means many people suffer on the unemployment queues or they even just give up on looking for work is because of how old they are. This society does not value people of a certain age. We know it about how they are treated in aged care. We know it when it comes to big organisations, and we know it when it comes to much of the political debate. It's all about the children are our future, and they are. But what about the people who had them, who feed them, who take care of them, who parent them, who grandparent them, who care for them, who love them, who seek to hand on family traditions? That's how you judge a country. So you can stick it where the sun doesn't shine that these people are looking out, when the reality is tax cut for everyone. Oh, there's a $40 million to sell you on a tax cut you don't have to approve. You don't have to apply for. That's just government advertising for the Labor Party. The people who are in charities, they got just $15 million extra to deal with many of the problems that are currently going on, including by people who are on the unemployment lines, currently trying to look for food. So again, I do not believe they could care less about the cost of living. But as always, cost of living, main focus, endless focus, laser-like focus for us because it matters. So many of our fellow Australians hurt, and they hurt all day, every day, so we're going to keep talking about it. And the far left-wing Australian Bureau of Statistics put out some numbers today, again interpreted by the Sydney Morning Herald, as people who are paying off home are feeling the inflation levels double that of the official levels. Geez, who's been telling you that for months? Who's been showing you that the headline number looks okay, but then when you actually look at food and transport and housing and insurance, that every single month it's been almost double? Well, we double down on that point. The Bureau of Statistics, this is what you need to see. Every single version of Australian is hurting. From people who have a job, who don't have a job, who are age pensioners, people who are getting other forms of welfare, self-funded retirees. And just to show the data before it's ruled misinformation by the thought police, have a look at people who currently are just employees. That's the extreme majority of Australians, the ones paying tax as we go. Their insurance has gone up in the past 12 months by 28%. Housing up 7%. Food and beverages 3.8%. Alcohol and tobacco 6.2%. Aged pensioners, their insurance, despite all of the apparent discounts, still up by almost 20%. What about other welfare recipients? 24% if they're trying to pay off insurance right now. All of these things ripping through families. And self-funded retirees, 17.9% on insurance, almost 5% on the place you live, 3% on what you eat, and 3.5% for keeping yourself healthy. All of this is causing trouble in the real world and is being watched by the Reserve Bank, as the pressure exists on the homeowners, mortgagees, and people who've even paid off their homes, let alone those that are renting, i.e. everyone. The expectation is that rates will either stay where they are rather than fall, or, God forbid, the Commonwealth Bank is right.
Near-term risk is with a rate hike. the RBA will not be cutting rates in the near term because they've just had an inflation print that was a little bit stronger than they'd forecast. You could say the consumer's probably a little bit weaker than they have anticipated, but if they're going to do anything in the next 3-4 months, they'd be more likely to hike than cut.
But does the government give two stuffs? Of course not. They will at an election, but they think what means you will trust them at the next election is firstly the Teals will stop the Liberal Party being able to get anywhere near government. And secondly, because they have two budget surpluses and presumably maybe even a third by the time of an election, but I don't know if we'll get that far, the expectation is that the budget surplus, i.e. even this government with $1 billion here and $1 billion there, but geez, there's a lot of money off budget and I'll get to that in the next few weeks. That is some mud to trudge through, but I'm having a look at it for you to try to tell you the real numbers that we owe. $13 billion is the expectation of this year's surplus. Guess what? They could still have a surplus of $10 billion if they did something that we have been crying for how long? If they cut petrol tax in half for 6 months, took it from 49 right back down to the early 20s, it'd cost them $3 billion. They'd still have a surplus, but they choose not to spend it on a reduction in a tax that hurts every single person in the country. Oh, but we really care. We really care about the little people, please. Such garbage. Now, as always, I like to smirk every now and then about political clashes between the left and the left. Perfect example of it is playing out right now in Victoria, where, believe it or not, Greens councillors are now cancelling their membership to the Greens. According to The Age, 2 Greens councillors have quit the party and publicly criticised the leadership of the Victorian branch over the alleged governance failures and claims it had pursued a politics of surveillance, disinformation and intimidation as a broader internal rift threatens to split the membership. The Age has spoken to 6 other Greens councillors on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal party matters, who confirmed that up to 5 more councillors are expected to quit the party before the next local elections in October. Now, if we can again return to the live pictures of what is happening in Los Angeles, this is an extension of the, frankly, left on left, because remember, these are, like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, these are deeply blue states and deeply blue cities where the far left will punish the Democratic Party for not being far left enough in relation to Israel and Gaza. But there is one thing I wanted to show you, and geez, I hope we've beeped this, but there's one thing I wanted to show you, because regardless of whether people were protesting for Israel, for Palestine, or anywhere and everywhere in between, both sides had the same chant today in the United States. Well, at least we can agree on that. In a moment or two's time, I want to know who you think the winner and loser of the week is. You can just jump onto our socials. In the meantime, no sooks, no lefties, plus the live coverage out of Los Angeles. Big and busy night this Thursday night. Reminder, we're here each and every Sunday night, so if you want to get the first hot take of the weekend's news, make sure you join us. And series link if you're watching us on Foxtel. We're, of course, each and every time our favourite people. No sooks, no lefties. That's the way you like it. That's the way I like it too. Michael Kroger joins us now from wonderful Melbourne. He's got plenty to say about what's been happening in this country. At least they're unified on the hatred of Joe Biden on both sides of the United States as things start to happen. We'll get to that in a second. And always love a fresh face on the show. And Emily Dye is going to be exactly that for us this evening from the Centre of Independent Studies. Her speciality is in intergenerational issues, i.e., how bad our future's going to be. There's plenty of it, right? We are, stuffed is the only word I can say right now, but we'll get into that. So I wanted to ask you first, Michael, about desperate governments trying to bribe voters, and about at what point people can be brought back from the brink. Every single indice shows that the Queensland government is going to get flushed. Latest polling saying 21 seats, meaning that even if they start to save the furniture, they're still losing more than 10 seats, which of course will get things pretty tight. But that said, $1,000, cost of living, all the rest of it here, I say they'll just take the money and run. But Doesn't it also become counterproductive sometimes, where you're in such a hole that when you offer $1,000, people go, wow, you're not even trying to hide it?
They will take the money and run like Carl Lewis, mate, as fast as they can. Look at it this way. If you go to the doctor, you prefer the doctor to have a medical degree before he or she sees you. If you see a lawyer, a law degree. If I see a tradesman, if I hire a tradesman, I want them to be qualified. So we have Stephen Miles, the Premier of Queensland. So against that background of putting your affairs in the hands of people who are qualified, your life in the hands of people who are qualified, this bloke's credentials are as follows. He wrote a PhD in trade union politics, which was about the renewal of the trade union movement. So that went well. And his other two jobs were he was a union official and a political advisor. Now he's in charge of billions of dollars against a background of no experience whatsoever. And to make things worse, on Tuesday, he became a venture capitalist because he and Albo gave $1 billion to this quantum computing company. So he's the first guy any of these great, venture capital firms around the world would hire, Stephen Miles, with those credentials. He'd be the first they'd hire. No, mate, this bloke is going to get booted out of Queensland, A, because the government's been very poor, and B, because he is totally unqualified to be Premier. He doesn't even have the qualifications to be a minister. The public have worked that out, and they are going to throw him to the wolves in October this year, and not before time, mate.
Oh, look, as I said, I think they should have gone at the last election, but all the COVID business, keep you safe, all the rest of it. But OK, despite the 4 years of pain, we are where we are. Emily, let's be straight up, though. Can people be bought? If we're being really honest, can people be bought?
Oh, I think people can always be bought, but there's also this case of, I think most people are going, but why are our energy bills so high in the first place? And that's blame is going to land with the government. There's going to be plenty of people that are going to miss out on this. It's not going to every Queenslander. So there's a lot of people that are going to be like, hey, why are my energy bills so high in the first place? You're just redistributing wealth, taking my money, and then giving it back to me. Like, is it really that good of a deal? So I think that there'll be plenty of frustration among Queenslanders.
Now I mentioned last night in great detail about hotel quarantine in Victoria, and I made the point again tonight about no accountability when it came to the Prime Minister in relation to this detainee mess. I mean, I understand the never admit wrong, because then you'll never ruin the new car smell. Well, somebody needs to tell the Prime Minister there's like an entire packet of prawns under the front seat, and it's about 40 degrees, right? It stinks, all right? There ain't no new car smell, all right? It's not even the slight smell of chicken nuggets and sweet and sour sauce. Spoken from experience. The point is, this is a rotten stench right now, and so despite the fact that his ministers set up systems, his ministers appointed boards, the very same people who made the mistakes that seem to have led to a person who is alleged, we all get the caveats here, about what happened in Western Australia, is not the response of the government, rather than to say, oh, sorry, hands off, we're not involved in this, sack the people who made the mistake.
Yeah, no, this is 100%.
Sorry, I yell on this show.
This is a case that's very
often. All the other polite shows. You're in the yelly show now.
You got it.
Thank you.
No, I'm with you. I think that this is a place to own up and say this was a disaster. This was an absolute mess. And if they want to move forward and come up with a good solution, you have to admit wrong. You have to admit that this was a huge failure and people are getting hurt. And there will likely be more stories like this woman who you see her face. She's
awful.
It's awful. An old woman just being beaten and robbed. I think the government needs to be like, hey, I'm sorry. And that goes a long way. We shouldn't be afraid to say sorry.
Well, but also, again, Michael, back to the question of accountability. If there is a system you created and control and it goes wrong, you can fix it by sacking the people who made the decisions, not mistakes, decisions, to send a message to any and everyone else who gets that business card and parks their plenty on a seat, that if they make the same mistake, they'll get the biscuit as well.
No, but mate, Albo's strategy is not something you're understanding. His strategy is as follows. Never admit fault, downplay everything, blame everybody else, run dead on issues, never is promised to make a statement which blames anybody. The first thing they do in press conferences, by the way, is always say how much they appreciate and admire the person aggrieved, harmed, whatever, wish them well, etc. No, don't forget this fellow Giles is a close factional ally of Albanese. So he's not going to sack him. Albo's hope is he just goes away. He can't sack him. He can't sack O'Neill because that would run counter to his whole thing, which is just run dead, pretend it, talk about something else, look over here, don't look over there. And that's part of his political strategy. The language he uses is there's never a quote much in what he says. Never admits fault. He just wants to run dead on the issue so the press get bored with it and so it goes away. That's his strategy and tactic on everything. If he sacks them, he admits the thing's a giant cock-up. And he's not going to do that. And finally, can I say, you see the odd reference to Bill Shorten being brought in to fix up this mess. I wouldn't think there's any way in the world Bill's going to fall for that three-card trick.
But OK, you've seen them at their best and their worst, all right? You saw Hawke at his best and then at his worst. Does this tactic ever actually work? Because I know that there's a cadre of the media around the PM who basically, again, right, like just this week, right, imagine if Tony Abbott or Scott Morrison had made the organiser of a women's rally cry. That'd be it for the week, let alone refer to the situation as emotional the next day, let alone in the question, in the press conference after National Cabinet, answering a question about his football team. Imagine the wall-to-wall, the rage. But instead, the media who set the narrative, because they're not about news, it's about narrative, have just knocked all of that out. They've kept it as quiet as possible. And you saw the PM basically roll that it's just a Sky News thing. So is the truth that it works as long as the media's on your side?
No. But what happens is if you deny the truth, if you deny the undeniable, the cadre of supporters around him, as you call them, gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And even your most ardent supporters have to, in the end, admit, well, this was a stuff-up. Right? It's plain for everyone out there to see that this is a total disaster. These ministers have got no idea what they're doing. Look, they're punch drunk. You feel in a sense, sorry for them. Their whole political careers have gone up in smoke. And can I just remind Albanese of the most brilliant media performer as Premier that I've seen in my lifetime, which is now getting on a few years, Peter Beattie in Queensland. Correct. Beattie was the master at making an art form of the apology, asking forgiveness, say I'll do better, and he moved on. And the electorate was sympathetic to Beattie because everyone knows politicians make mistakes, as we all do in life. The politician like Beattie that came in and said this was a stuff-up, they gave him great credit. And in that famous election a few years ago when he said, we've got to clear up the Family Services Department in Queensland, it's a terrible mess. And someone said, yeah, but you're the government, you're in charge of it. He said, that's right, that's why I've got to be re-elected to clean it up. Only I can clean it up. I mean, Beattie was the master because he would apologise for things that were wrong, that everyone knew he'd made that mistake. In denying the undeniable, Albo is painting himself into a corner, mate, and the corner will get smaller and smaller as the months go on. Yeah, I mean, Emily, it is interesting as well that he wants to cast himself as the big ideas guy, right? Yeah. So they want to turn around and to use the obvious term, it feels like the country's being gaslit, right? Like just BS too, about, we're doing everything we can for low-income workers. We're doing everything we can on cost of living. But then the reality is the taxes go up, the things they could cut, the things they introduce, the tax cuts, which, yes, is a nice big number when you're talking about as a whole in Canberra, but in reality, if you're on $45,000, which supposedly is the focus, it's $15 a week.
Yeah, it's not a ton. And we've gutted a lot of those tax cuts out anyway. Like the high income earners, the people that my generation, we will be those people. They're saying, oh, you don't deserve to be compensated for bracket creep. And we're going to be lost out as our careers progress. As inflation continues to go up at astronomical rates, it's still higher than it was expected.
100%.
And cost of living is high. Housing prices are ridiculous. Yeah. And unless you can actually give tangible amount of money back to the people, then... Well, that's what I find frustrating, right? Which is that, again, right, that they mention the lofty goal, they go nowhere near it. In fact, they make it worse, yet still they get the pat on the back. But I think that, as Michael says, the cadre gets, smaller and smaller
but perhaps that's why you start hiring the cadre to work for you. Hello, Farouk. Now, can we just take a live shot of what's happening in LA? Because I'm going to go to a break in a second and we'll respond to things in a moment. But the live footage I'm watching via Fox News, which is similar to camera to what we're seeing here, is that there's a little more of a physical scuffle that's happening here. Again, police will win this. That's the way it always works. But the lighting, as you can see, it's all about trying to blind them. Literally, as we were talking in a couple of minutes leading up to this, they were kicking police officers in the head and, again, trying to do their best to resist. But, as you can see, the tents are going to be pulled down, the barricades come down, the building gets guarded, and slowly but surely people get moved away. So we'll talk about that and a whole lot more in a moment or two's time here on Paul Murray Live. Let's take an early break and then we'll get back with that and our winners and losers of the week here on Thursday night. Thanks for watching. As we speak, police moving their way through the protest camp at UCLA. This is after they did so in New York. No such movement about what is happening here in Australia. Talking about this and a whole lot more is Emily Dye from the Centre of Independent Studies and Michael Kroger, who I know is deeply passionate about the issue and has said plenty. But as we watch now, and if we need to bring the sound up from time to time, we are starting to see the pulling apart of what's been happening in UCLA. When I watch Al Jazeera, they are anti-war protests. When I watch Fox News, they are pro-Hamas protests. We can all decide where everything sits in the middle. But the reality here, Michael, is that universities, what we are seeing now, I believe, is the symptom of what has been growing for a very long time, and it's an issue that's playing out specifically when it comes to what's happening in the Middle East. But we saw it on Black Lives Matter, we saw it on Occupy Wall Street, we've seen this on multiple fronts, and we've seen it getting bigger each time, the sense of student entitlement here.
Not only that, and of course, a lot of these students have had their academic debts forgiven by Joe Biden since he became president, which will no doubt please the American middle class, working class families. So, mate, what we're seeing here is one of the more disgraceful acts I've seen in my lifetime. It's not a protest against the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the Chinese persecution of the Uyghurs,
Great point.
Or any number of other human rights abuses around the world. This is simply an attack on Jews under the guise of, oh no, we're pro-Palestine. I mean, most of these people wouldn't know anything about the history of Palestine. They don't know what river, they don't know what sea. It's just anti-Jewish and anti-Western, Western culture, Western countries, etc. So it's in the guise of, there's an apartheid or there's a genocide. All these words, which are just words and phrases which have no factual basis. This is just an outbreak of anti-Jewish hatred by these racists, some of whom are no doubt neo-Nazis, and it's disgusting. And before we get to the losers of the week, let me tell you the losers of the week are the university chancellors and vice-chancellors and university boards in Australia who are allowing this to happen on university campus, including my own alma mater at Monash University, where they're allowing these disgusting anti-Jewish demonstrations to take place. What happened to the policies of safe spaces? Jewish students are fearful of going on campus in a Western liberal democracy like Australia. Shame on you to these university administrations. They shouldn't be there. It's just disgraceful, mate.
Agree completely. Again, if again, as described by Al Jazeera as anti-war, right? There's multi-fronts where what you can come forward to talk about war. There's the opportunity to turn around and say, well, hang on, the American connection defence-wise and the military-industrial complex, all of those things, right? But they're not saying that. What they're saying is intifada. What they're saying is about the power struggles, but also some pretty nasty stuff about Jews. There's no question, right? What's your thoughts on what plays out here and whether this becomes pretty much the future?
I mean, I have a very different take on this situation, because I think that students should be allowed to protest on their campuses, and I think it was a serious mistake on the part of the universities to come in and bring in the police. I say let people say what they want to say.
But when they run into the buildings, that's the issue.
That's different. Yeah, that's an issue. When you're running into the building, when you are vandalizing, there should be a crackdown on that. However, I think that the universities were really quick and too quick to bring in the police and what crime has been committed when it was a case of, oh, they're trespassing. No, they're not trespassing. This is their university. They have every right to be there. So I do think that universities do need to take a stand for freedom of speech on both sides, deal with the violence, protect the Jewish students, make sure that everyone is feeling safe and keeping it calm. But I think a situation like this, bringing in the police, unless it's a violent protest, can only make the situation look worse.
So just I'm testing, not arguing, right? Because I'm interested in your theory. When you unfurl a 2-story banner that says Intifada, that's free speech or that's incitement?
Oh, I support free speech even when it is heinous. I think you need to put the ideas out there, and if they're bad ideas, they should be slammed. Yeah. So if you want to attack a specific group, you can attack, say, women. Or redheads, and death to redheads. Let's say that.
No one would dare.
It's like, say it, and
then we can test
that idea, and we can say, hey, no, you're wrong.
Yeah. So, Michael, what about that idea that even the most detestable things, as long as they are not done literally violently or by breaking into a building, you've got to put up with it in a free society?
Yes, well, I've heard that argument before. Unfortunately, that is not a view I share. There is a line. There is a line you draw in Western society. In the same way in defamation laws, we talk about free speech. You don't have an entitlement to free speech. You're not allowed to defame people. You're not allowed to improperly, unlawfully damage someone's reputation. Free speech doesn't allow you to yell fire in a theatre, etc., etc., etc. We've moved in the modern era to oppose hate speech, incitement to violence, which can be done through speech. So I completely disagree with my fellow panellists when I simply say this.
But what is incitement to violence? Is it using the wrong pronouns? Am I being violent there?
Incitement, if you say from the river to the sea, that to me is an incitement to violence because you are calling for the destruction of the State of Israel and the murder of Jews. That to me is an incitement to violence. If you fly Nazi flags, that to me potentially incites violence. If you fly flags, as one university has, from the Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine, that to me is an incitement of violence. If you get on radio, as 2 ANU students did yesterday on ABC radio saying we support Hamas, we will not condemn Hamas, that to me is hate speech because you are. I mean, if these clowns, these idiots from ANU, they're students, they're getting an education at one of the great universities of the world, the ANU, and they will not condemn an organisation. I've seen the 47-minute IDF video. I've seen a video of Hamas people beheading people and shooting people and murdering them. I've seen all that. If you haven't seen it, people watching this show and you get a chance to see it, do not see it because images will live with you that you'll never forget, you'll never get out of your head. So all of those things, my friend, to me cross the line between free speech and hate speech. And what we're seeing on these university campuses is hate speech against Jews. And, you want to know the truth of the matter? The truth of the matter is Anthony Albanese has been disgraceful and hopeless on this. A shout out, by the way, to Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, who's been excellent. Albo, it's time for you to stand up. This outbreak of anti-Semitism has taken place on your watch and you've done nothing.
Good stuff. Thank you, guys. I do appreciate it. We'll do winners and losers next week. I prefer a debate each and every time. Thank you very much. Do appreciate it, guys. Thank you, Emily, and thank you very much to you, Michael. Quick break back with Ball. Final thoughts for our show this week. Don't forget we're here on Sunday night, and the late debate is 5 minutes from now. Look, I don't know whether this is happening to you, but I had to go to like 4 different places today to actually find an ATM, right? I wanted to go to the car wash, boring real life stuff, right? But when I was at one of those places, a lovely bloke by the name of Ian and his beautiful wife came up to me as well, and they said they watch the show each and every night and they appreciate everything that we do at Sky News and that we're part of the fight. So this happens very often and I appreciate it every time. So I just want to say to everyone who's ever come up and said the lovely things, they really do fuel all of us here to continue to do what we do, to see the fight, to take on the fight and to push as hard as possible. So thank you for your support this week. We'll see you again Sunday. Go Yankees, go Tigers. Ta-da.